Hey, folks.
Hey.
Morning, afternoon, whatever it is for you.
Universal greeting time to you too, Sean. Like the new orange look.
Yeah, that's kind of odd.
So I know we've got a couple of folks already shared that they won't be joining today in the meeting doc. I'll drop a link in the Zoom chat. No, we've got a fairly light agenda today. But if anyone has anything they'd like to add, please do so. And we'll see what we can get through. Maybe we can do some triage of some of the undecided issues for 1.0 milestone. Give it a couple more minutes for folks to make their way in before we get started. Okie dokie. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So, first item on the agenda today, we've got Mark's filed a pull request against the proposals repository just to convert the agreed to items in the Google Doc for SLSA v1 into a markdown document to capture it for kind of, oh look, there's Mark.
Hey,
Good
my other meeting
day, Mark.
got delayed, so I'll
No
be here for a
problem.
minute.
Yeah, so I was just talking about your PR against the proposals repository. It just converts the agreed to items from the Google Doc into Markdown for kind of broader visibility. So I've dropped a couple of links in. Please, folks on this call, just take a few moments to mark your agreement with the proposals, assuming that you do still agree. I've provided a GitHub PR link and also a link to the rendered version in Mark's fork, just so that all of the links in the document work. The Markdown rendering is a little bit different in the diff view versus the original kind of raw file. So any questions, comments on that one from anyone? Cool. Awesome. The other thing, or the next thing was, and in similar vein, just spending some time to talk a bit about getting some more reviewers for the 1.0 change and what process we can follow for 1.0. We get a lot of good discussion in this meeting, and we don't always get a lot of review on changes to the repository, and I suspect a bunch of that is because some of the specification is part of a website, so there's a bunch of changes that aren't related to the things we discuss here. But even when the changes are related, there's kind of styling and things in the way that can make reviewing those changes difficult. So I'm curious to spend a bit of time talking about how we can make the review easier and what we can do to streamline the 1.0 process. One kind of proposal, just to get a discussion going, is that for 1.0 PRs, targeting the kind of hidden version of the 1.0 spec, we could drop from requiring 2 approvals to 1 approval, and then go through like a more intense review process of the complete set of changes before 1.0 is marked as final. Exactly how to do that, I'm not entirely certain. So yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on how we might do this, I'd love to hear them. Or any objections to the proposal, really? Any thoughts at all?
From my point of view, I think it's a lot of changes all at once, right? In the PR, and so I would like a huge chunk of time to just review it, and I think that's where I get stuck, because it's hard to find that huge chunk of time, and I think it's overwhelming, and so I don't want to like just chunk it up into different pieces. So that's my challenge. I don't know if others are having that challenge, but I think that's part of why I've not been able to review it, is because I really do need a huge chunk of time just to review all of the changes that are being proposed. There's a lot of green in that PR.
Yeah,
Which PR specifically are you talking about?
The one in the first link, it's PR 7. And then even the one that you had mentioned in the last SLSA meeting, Mark, I was trying to go through all the different changes, and I was like, okay, this is a lot. I can't just do this in like 10 minutes. So PR, what is it? It says PR number 7 for the SLSA proposal, right? It's 478 lines, right? So just reading through all of that, right? Making sure that I remember where we discussed it, and it's what we discussed, etc. But again, this is my issue, but that's just a point of view. And then the other one that you mentioned on SLSA's meeting, I think it had like many file changes. I think it was at least 4. But it was just a lot of changes for me to review in a matter of like 10 minutes. Yeah, I think 486. Yes, this one, yeah, files changed 20, right? So that definitely requires a little bit more inspection, right, to going through all the changes that were made. So
yeah, and to clarify, so that 486, the one that created the new directory, some of I said in the pull request thing, the entire v1.0 tree is just copied verbatim. GitHub does not, the diff doesn't tell you this. It looks like a new file.
got it.
But like if you compare the hashes of the files, they're the same.
Okay.
And I have like a little command in the pull request that you could verify that it is the same. That is, the ls tree tells you the hash of a directory. And so if you give it, I guess maybe there's too much magic here in the command, but if you compare the 0.1 to the 1.0 tree hashes, they should be the same. And if they're not, that was not intentional, and we should fix that.
Okay.
So yeah, that one has, I don't know of a good way to do this. And that's why also I wanted to switch to like a branch-based thing, because that would make the version history easier, but that's going to require some like technical work to change. So for now, we're just doing file copies. But yeah, so that one is a big one. The other one, the proposal doc, the intention was to just copy the text from the Google Doc without changes. But yeah, if you want to re-review the whole thing just to make sure, like, because like you probably reviewed in chunks at the time, but didn't read the whole thing. Yeah, that's totally understandable. Would it help? I guess we've had it this long. I don't know. We could either. Never mind. That's fine. Yeah, I don't think it's particularly urgent to get it into Markdown. So I think having like that pull request be open for a little while people have time to review is fine for the proposal.
Yeah, I'm extremely sympathetic to the this stuff takes time. Admission, like that it certainly does. And I think the challenge is to find something that works without slowing down or slowing things down too much. Right?
Yeah.
We wanted to get SLSA 1.0 out sometime this calendar year, and that seems very unlikely given that like there's national holidays in North America, and then like winter is a big shutdown for a lot of companies. So this really is just like let's throw some ideas around. So one idea I've seen other communities use is there'll be a time window for a review, and if there aren't reviews in that time window, it's assumed that people don't object enough to like kind of comment, and that can help motivate things, but it also can just mean that some things just like get through without any actual review. Which is why I kind of liked the counter proposal in the document, which is just like reducing the restrictions or reducing the requirement to one approver while we have a flurry of changes, but it really won't help the final 1.0 review if time is the gating factor for a few people, which it sounds like it is, like in the chat and Melba's comment. Then yeah, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in favor of having the draft be lowering the barrier, and we mark it clearly on whatever site. I do think it's helpful to have one reviewer because I feel like that single reviewer catches a whole lot of stuff. And in fact, the couple pulls that were sent so far had useful review comments, and changes were made because of that. So if we could have enough time to have a single reviewer, and if we set the bar to, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it just has to like advance it, and then we book effectively several weeks in November for like the community, this group in particular, but also anyone else who wants to review it as a whole. I imagine it's probably more efficient and easier to read the whole thing in the final form than to review each kind of iteration.
Yeah.
So I guess the obvious kind of following up to that is, would folks anticipate being able to spend extra time doing review of like a closer to final form document? Because I think time is still a barrier, but if we have a window we're aiming for over a review period, for many of us, it would kind of be easier to block out time.
Yeah, another alternative is actually just have 0 reviews for the draft. We could publish it to a branch instead of to the main branch, to some draft branch. And then we basically defer all of the reviews to the final form. You could always send a pull request asking for an individual review if you want particular feedback, which if we're having problems getting enough reviewer time, like both now and the final form, we could just push it all to the end. That would be, I think, a fine too.
I do like, personally, I'm really in favor of having some review happen. Like it just turns it into more of a collaboration and catches some some things that might slow down like the mass review later on. And yeah, like Melba says in the chat, it kind of has an opportunity to try and ensure that at least two people are interpreting the consensus. So I think there's a lot of value in continuing to require at least one reviewer. It's just whether everyone is comfortable, or whether there's kind of, I don't think we're going to get everyone come out and say, yes, I'm comfortable reducing the reviewer constraints, but maybe we won't get anyone objecting to it, and that's the same thing.
Oh yeah, that's a good question that Sebastian just brought up. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No problem. Go ahead.
What's the most critical, 486 or number 7?
I don't think anything. Well, there's nothing pending right now, and so I think that I just listed that one as an example, like it has been reviewed. So I don't think it's. I mean, if you're interested, you could take a look. I think probably the most important right now is the proposal one, just to make sure that it really does capture the intent of this group. Like if you disagree with something in there, we should, reflect that, or reflect the, alternate opinions, etc. It's not urgent, but I think it's important. I'll probably have another pull request later this week on defining the levels page. It would probably be good to have someone from this group review. We could also have a convention around who's doing the review, because like there's no way to say I am doing the review, and there's actually no way in GitHub to assign it to people unless they're part of the org. And it also auto assigns anyone who is in the code owners, and there's no way to unassign them. So like Joshua and Michael and I think get automatically added to the reviewers always, and you can't remove us, which is not very good UI.
And also your reviews are required, I think, as well. So basically, regardless of anyone else's approval and review, you still have to do one as well.
I think it's still set up just for 2 reviewers. So whoever is like listed as a, oh yeah. So like on that end, it's like whoever is in whatever group it is in GitHub, there needs to be at least 2 of those folks need to give a thumbs up in order for it to get merged.
I don't know if we have any controls in place to require steering committee folks, two or more. I think it was 2 or more steering committee members reviewed. I think the only controls are around code owners. Right. But yeah, just Sebastian's comment in the chat, like if someone does comment in a pull request or issue, you can then assign them to it once they've commented and kind of opted into the discussion thread. So people can certainly comment and say, hey, I'm interested in reviewing this. We could then assign them as reviewer in the GitHub UI. I don't know if that helps. I guess that helps demonstrate when people are intending to do some review. So we could try that if there's appetite for it.
Yeah, I think like if maybe we could use a convention that if you are reviewing a pull request and it's going to take more than, like an hour or 2 from when you start, that you let people know. So, if there's other reviewers that if other people are short on time, then they'll just say, okay, that person's reviewing, I'm not going to bother. And also for the author, because if someone comes in and then approves it and then they merge it all while you're reviewing, you're like, oh crap, like what was the point of my review? Or like, I wanted to say this thing, but now it's merged. And like, do I really want to comment after the fact? I think it's nice to let people know that you've started it, and then they could hold the submission before until your thing is ready. Because like often, like I do that, like I start doing this and then I have other work and then I don't get back to it for a day or 2.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah. Do we need a convention on labeling or naming pull requests to make sure that we can prioritize them as for 1.0 as opposed to anything else that's up against the spec.
Good idea. I think the clearest thing is maybe if we start each one starting with like v1.0 colon, because then it's right in the title. Like labels and other stuff are kind of hard to see. And also I think there's permissions things if anyone, like not everyone can add those labels, but anyone could just add that prefix to the title.
Yeah, the PR subject prefix works for me.
Mm.
A low barrier, but like high signal. Okay, so I think we have some consensus around trying to better signal which things need review with the PR subject prefix. We've agreed we want to keep some review on 1.0 PRs. I didn't hear any objections to reducing the number of required reviewers, but I didn't hear a lot of agreement either. What's the best way to do this? Should we do a raise of hands, see if we can get some kind of quorum on it? So yeah, if you would be happy to reduce the number of required reviewers for the 1.0 spec while it's in draft, then please use the raise hand reaction in Zoom. I'm going to count. Should I count thumbs as hands? Hey, thanks. Looks like we've got 5. Zoom is very helpfully resorting the participants list. Yes, 5. Mike's on the fence. As a reviewer, you have the power to change this, Mike, as a maintainer.
Yeah, no, I like by on the fence, I'm like, I don't have as much of an opinion one way or the other. Like I could see valid reasons to go both. So whatever the, whatever the consensus is. So I abstain.
Okay, I'm just writing this down.
Yes, and to Melba's point, I think well, at least I'm interpreting this as dropping it from 2 to 1 rather than 2 to 0.
Yes, that was absolutely the intent, but it's good to clarify. I'm going to write that in the doc. Yes, Sebastian further clarified. I've updated the document to say that this is reducing required reviewers from 2 to 1 for v1.0 changes while v1.0 remains draft. Hopefully that's clear enough. Thank you, everyone. Cool. Okay, we've got 3 more, sorry, topics on the list. I added reviewing some of the maybe 1.0 issues, but I'm going to bump that down because people have proposed agenda topics. So someone has suggested SLSA build a spec, and if that was you, please speak up.
Yeah, that was me. So once again, if there's time, I think the thing that Mark and I had a little bit of a conversation on it. It might not be something that once again we want to take on for 1.0, but just something that was brought up by a couple of different folks is sort of a lot of the metadata from a SLSA attestation is sort of encoded in the invocation piece, and it's based on what is coming out of the builder. And so there was some originally it kind of stemmed out of the like dependencies versus source sort of conversation. It sounds like, at least at some level from the SLSA perspective, we should just view both of those as being the same thing, a dependency and a source, because we just can't really make the distinction. But individual builders might make that distinction. And one of the things that was kind of brought up also from some of the folks who are doing the SLSA GitHub building, they plan on making the SLSA GitHub builder sort of pluggable and all this stuff. And one of the things that was kind of like they wanted to kind of think through was like, does it make sense to have some way of allowing the builders with the URI to be able to say, here is my spec for the URI. So this is some additional content. So if you're ingesting SLSA, you can look at SLSA and then you go and you say, oh, this is a builder I understand, like the SLSA GitHub builder. Cool. That means I should be also expecting this information in the invocation, in the, things. And so I can also derive additional sort of context from it. And additional sort of interesting metadata they might want to use from it. And so one of the things was just like, even just like hey, that's something to consider, might be just at some point. Like I don't want to also hold up anything for 1.0 for that though.
So is the topic here then is effectively, I heard two things from there, I think. One might be extracting more common fields and adding them to the standard, which may be, all right, sorry, I'm not going to interpret that. I'm just going to say what I think I heard. And then the other thing I think I heard was how to effectively communicate when a builder is including richer metadata in these like non-standardized fields where the standard basically says this is an object you can supplement. How do they communicate that additional information for a verifier to leverage? Are those reasonable interpretations?
The second one, definitely. Can you repeat the first one again?
Effectively, that there are like 3 or 4 places in the SLSA provenance spec that say this is optional, builder defined, and we might want to add some of the common fields that crop up as people start to implement back into the spec, right?
But potentially, or we might just want to make the claim that, hey, look, those fields are going to be very much builder dependent fields. And so even if there is, so we might want to provide, I think, hints or something like that. But like, for example, if everybody uses the term inputs, right, as to or use the word dependencies or uses the term sources, whatever, I think there's things there. But I think there's definitely something where we do want to, like, I think the bigger piece is allowing individual or making it clear how folks might use a SLSA builder specification to hit some of those extra things, because people are starting to ask the question of, hey, I'm running a Go build and I want to invoke policy against that Go build. Could I use the invocation to sort of address that policy? But if I don't know it was a Go build, because SLSA doesn't have any of that metadata, but there is the builder, and the builder says this is the SLSA GitHub Go builder. Cool, I know this is a Go builder. I can do these things. I think that's kind of where a lot of it came up.
I think that's the build type URI, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, yes. The build, that's what I meant. The build type URI that's used by the builder to do. Sorry, yes, my mistake. Yes, the build type, and because right now the build type, I don't think anybody has a specification for their build type or what folks should be actually looking at from the SLSA perspective of like, oh, hey, now look at the build type. The build type now should give you the specification for how those things are. And then to your point, those things are potentially from the SLSA end, once again, like we might want to provide a thing of like, hey, generally people say use this as the term for dependencies or whatever it might be.
Yeah, my entirely and I guess I'm just talking first because I'm unmuted, so apologies. My entirely unsatisfactory response is that this feels like we almost have to wait and see. It feels too early to try and codify anything, but yeah, maybe things are further along. I haven't attended the tooling meeting for a while. Maybe things are further along than I realized. I'm going to mute and see if anyone else has thoughts they want to share.
So I don't want to put Sean on the hook, but I know Sean had a couple of ideas here as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that this is very implementer specific, and there's no real consensus around it right now. I think having the GitHub action out there as an example of what to do is a good start. But the other thing is, with these builder type specs, is there anything on the end of the URIs that these point to at the moment? And I guess for the GitHub one, probably, but for everyone else, maybe. And then also, what does that look like? What's the definition there? I mean, should we have a specification for how you should be able to do that so that it's machine readable?
That's a good point. I forget where in the suite of specifications we recommend it sits, but I'm fairly certain we do recommend that if you have a type URI, it's resolvable so that people can read, effectively the spec for the type URI. And the convention I've suggested is that they use the same kind of formatting conventions as the SLSA provenance spec, but that may not be machine readable as requested. So
yeah, I mean, that kind of gives us syntax, but not necessarily semantics about what's.
Yeah, and I think I think so to give a couple of the use cases that people had brought up was, okay, cool. I now have this SLSA GitHub build, and I want to validate some of the stuff that's coming out of the invocation, like some of the inputs that are coming out of the invocation about like what build number and whatever else. What information should I expect to be in there? Right. Because one of the things that could happen, right, is somebody could claim to be a particular builder and not actually be that builder, or somehow not be compliant with that builder. You do a machine readable thing, you go and just expect a thing to exist. It doesn't exist. Whereas if there's a spec, okay, cool, I can check the inputs against the spec. If the inputs don't match the spec, this is not valid SLSA GitHub generator build. Right. You might still, and to be clear, you might still be able to get interesting information out of the general SLSA attestation, but you might not be able to get that richer stuff. And like some of this is coming to a head with like, the SLSA GitHub generator, and then the fact that there's going to be plugins for the SLSA GitHub generator, right? There's going to be like a Go plugin and a Python plugin and a this, that, and the other thing. And so there might be also, once again, like, the SLSA GitHub generator might have a spec, and then a parameter to that spec is like the Python one, which changes the spec in this way. And just being able to kind of say, okay, cool, I can pull down a JSON with that spec. A lot of automated stuff, whether, whatever the specification might be, like a JSON schema or protobuf or whatever, it doesn't matter. But if there's some way to sort of figure that out, great. There's a new builder. I can pull out semantic information from the builder because, once again, if SLSA says generally input should be used in this way, if generally certain things should be used in this way, like a lot of automated tools could potentially just start to ingest a lot of that information, be able to pull in interesting stuff. And then a much later on sort of idea that was kind of being thrown around as well, a use case was like from a rebuilder use case, right? Could somebody take enough information out of a salsa build to run a build, to sort of say, could I now take all of those inputs, run them in a different environment, assuming I can pull in whatever is required and be able to rebuild it?
Yeah, I get the desire completely. I think there's like what we can and should do in the spec today is relatively limited while we see some more kind of real world implementations. I think Sean's comment on should that URI even resolve is a really important one. Like, I feel like that's recommended somewhere, but maybe we're not doing a good enough job of communicating that, and even what to put there when it is resolvable.
Yeah. I've seen in similar sorts of things that resolves to something like the JSON schema of a project. The thing that is also the thing that I think we might just want to do from our perspective is to say, like, this is, either something we want to eventually take care of or not take care of or whatever, and just make it clear to end users, like, hey, look, yes, you should, if you are generating a salsa, a JSON, like a builder, you should have that specification defined somewhere, right? You should be able to do this, this, and this. The intention of having this is to eventually have machine readable, systems to be able to pull that information out and process it, analyze it, potentially rebuild. Some of those use cases, we don't have a lot of, like we can make it clear that we don't have a lot of, at least for 1.0 and yada, yada, we don't have any guidelines on how you should do any of that stuff, but just be aware that's the intention. And so maybe for Salsa 2.0, you can imagine that's kind of very clearly defined, and then people can go, great, I can just pull in various different builders and yada yada and be able to map that against my policy. And this salsa GitHub builder that was built in this way, yada yada, I trust both the identity that built the thing, and then I also trust the based on the inputs, those inputs match my policy or whatever. Great, I'm gonna let that into my environment. But yeah, so I don't want to take up any more time on this, because I think it's going to be based on the initial consensus, it just sounds like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea that's going to be significantly more in the future. But if need be, does it make sense to write up a quick proposal to just sort of add something in there just to clarify build type a little bit more, to say that build type should be like, there should be some sort of specification, right, to make sure that folks who understand the build type could process it, and then say, in future iterations of Salsa, we might have additional guidelines.
Yeah, we've got an explicit goal of making the 1.0 spec like communicate some of the future intentions. So I think there's value in driving consensus around like whether we want to claim this as a future intention effectively, and also the idea of creating something to emphasize that the type URI should be, not must be, but should be resolvable, and provide some kind of specification at the end of it that folks can use to augment how they interpret the problem specification. I think that's a really sound idea. But yeah, that's certainly my opinion. Okay, sounds like we've come to a stopping point on that topic, and Sean has a good one on the list for ephemeral, isolated, and hermetic distinctions.
Yeah. So I think there's at least two discussions, if not more, on that kind of touch on this about, where the boundaries around builds should be and at what level we should do that. And I think we potentially, there's a lot of potential overlap in how people understand these things. So I think it's worth kind of coming down on, because we've got one which is isolated and ephemeral at SLSA level 3, and then hermetic at SLSA level 4. And you could interpret isolated to be, or different people could take isolated and hermetic as being either overlapping or entirely interchangeable. I think if we're going to have ephemeral and isolated at level 3 and hermetic at level 4, we need to make a clear distinction between what those things are. I also think that the intent of the mechanic that you use for this is important over just necessarily the implementation, because we know that it's possible to break out of Chroot jails, it's possible to break out of containers, it's possible to break out of VMs. Are those the intent of those systems? Is it a requirement of those systems that you be able to break out, or is it just a flaw in the underlying system that allows you to do so? And I think we should be taking the intent of the underlying mechanism as enough to include it as part of the spec, rather than, well, container D is great and all, but if you do this hack, you can break out of it, or if it's configured this way, you can break out of it. I don't think that's necessarily relevant to the spec. I think that's just a vulnerability in the underlying system that needs to be addressed. So I just wondered what other people's take on those terms and what they mean for the specification were. I mean, ephemeral is another bit of a weird one as well, in that, isolated and hermetic don't say anything about whether or not the builds are contemporary, but ephemeral does, in that it speaks to the lifetime of the build environment.
Yeah.
And again, how far do you draw that down? Is ephemeral the lifetime of the container? Is it the lifetime of the host machine that opens the container? Is it, if that's a VM, is it the physical machine underneath? How far down do you want to go with that? And I think it's necessary for us to specify some boundaries in terms that people will be able to understand and implementers will be able to take forward, in order for those things to be meaningful.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree. This is there's like 3 or 4 issues at least, I think, that are touching on around these terms and how to interpret them. And that somewhere when I was doing some triage earlier, there was a proposal to make isolated and ephemeral. Was it isolated and ephemeral? There was a proposal to merge 2 of them because it was like they're basically 2 mechanisms that are building towards the same control, not the right term, but providing the same functionality feature of the system. And if you isolate them, it's really difficult to describe them individually in a way that would lead to the results we're recommending here. So
yeah, I think there was some suggestion about dependencies complete and hermetic. I think one's potentially an implication of the other, but it's not. I don't think they're the same thing. But again, that's up in level 4 anyway.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we did that worked pretty well in the CNCF best practices guide was we sort of we viewed some of these almost like a hierarchy, where it's like, yes, hermetic means all of these things, right? And that's maybe the top level, like hermetic and reproducible are sort of the top level things. But there's lots of other things like, repeatable is maybe not, all reproducible builds are repeatable, but not all repeatable builds are reproducible. And it's the same thing, like all hermetic builds are isolated, but maybe, but not all isolated builds are truly hermetic or whatever based on a particular distinction. So we might just want to have like almost, I don't want to say like levels because that's overloaded in everything we've been doing, but I think it might make sense just to kind of say like, the Venn diagram is more of like, hermetic means all of this, isolated means this, and be able to kind of make it clear. Because yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that point.
Yeah, I think even if it's not hard and fast part of the spec, I mean, we shouldn't be calling out particular implementations and technologies in the spec necessarily, but certainly in the accompanying guidance, we should be saying things like containerd is good enough for isolated, and the fact that you've got short-lived containers that do just the build is enough for ephemeral. Those things should probably be in guidance as opposed to necessarily in the spec themselves, but the spec needs to be a little firmer about the distinction between these things.
I think there is also the strength of isolation. You have security boundaries and like container, VM, complete hardware box. And depending on the level of assurance that you want, container may be sufficient for this, but for other things you may want to use a one-time machine. It's very unlikely scenario, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could be, you could have like a isolated level 1 for SLSA 3 and more levels for higher SLSA levels as we go on. But then, at that point, does hermetic become redundant and it's just another level of isolated?
Yeah, but I mean, these words are hard. Language is really the hardest part of a lot of computer science. So.
We have to translate this into Korean as well.
Not my, I'm fortunately ill-equipped to do that. So, I think there's like an ongoing recognition that we need to be a bit more careful about what terms we use. Like one of the first issues that was ever filed against the SLSA repository shortly after it being open source was someone saying, what the heck does hermetic even mean? Like I'm used to it in a medical context, but I don't know what it means in a build system context. And I don't have a good solution for how to succinctly describe some of these things without using words that are prone to misinterpretation effectively. I think the only recourse we have is this is where the community of folks around this really helps, because we can have dialogue both in this meeting and in the PRs and try and make sure that we are clear on intent and that these are all terms that exist prior to the forming of this kind of community. But definitely, sorry, I'm just mumbling now. In agreement, I think that we need to do something here, but without concrete ideas of what to do.
Well, I think the discussion on those tickets is still open, and then maybe let's further that discussion a little further and see whether any consensus arrives, and if it does or doesn't even, maybe somebody should just put together a pull request to kind of put in some clarification on that, because at least then there's a straw man that people can pick at as well.
Yeah, so let's try and get a few more ideas on those issues over the next week or two, and then see if we stimulate any discussion, and if not, we can, like you say, move ahead with a PR and try and start clarifying. Sounds good. Thank you, Sean. I would encourage everyone to dive into the linked issues, but more than welcome for more comments here if anyone has anything they'd like to add. Okay, great. We have 10 minutes left. I'm not sure how effective trying to triage some issues will be. Does anyone have anything else they wanted to throw on to the end of the discussion?
I think the only thing that I think might be worthwhile in either an upcoming meeting or something, maybe as just an issue, is I know some of the initial timelines we had for 1.0 might be a little off, and just it might be worthwhile just to kind of say generally, like, when do we, what quarter do we anticipate 1.0, something like that.
Yeah, it would be good to, especially given the discussion earlier about needing some good time to be able to focus on reviewing things. It would be good to put a target date or target window together.
I feel like we probably need another week or two's worth of kind of measurement on effort before we can on how well we do against these things, because at the moment I don't think there's apart from Mark's PR, which splits the directory, I don't think there's anything that we've got that addresses anything that we've identified for 1.0 right now. In terms of pull request, there's just the issues. So I think there's we don't really have a measure of how long it would take us to get through these issues yet. Maybe that's a call to action for us to get started on it at the very least.
Yeah, we've got the PR in for like setting up the scaffolding. I don't know if anyone's had a look, but you can now go to the SLSA website and see, like, if you navigate to the right URL, there's a 1.0 draft, and it warns you that it's a draft. And at the minute, it's just the same as 0.2. But there's a place we can start doing some of this work. And if we've got consensus on the proposal PR, then definitely, if there's something you'd like to start working on, please do. And just I think just communicating that you're working on it to avoid someone the unlikely event that there's someone beating you to it. But yeah, still worth doing, I think. If there is something you would like to work on, please do, and just shout on the issue that you're going to do so. But I also, I agree with you, Sean, that we need a bit more time to figure out just what the scope is before we can start to estimate. We should keep that in mind, though, trying to make sure we have a window that we're aiming for, that we can communicate to folks for the review period. Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to say let's wrap up 6 minutes early rather than trying to fill the time superficially. So another good discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and I look forward to the next one. And yeah, see you on the PRs and issues in the meantime, hopefully. Have a good week.